Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as it looks like the Tories have now surrendered all sovereignty that is required of us, and we will be joining the Pacific Trading Bloc, the CPTPP, at some point anyway, before the next election, which provides us with less trade and less say over the rules than was the case with the EU. I'm going to discuss some aspects of not only the cost of this arrangement, but the sheer hypocrisy of Brexiteers for supporting it. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I've talked a little bit about our journey towards membership of the CPTPP, this Pacific Trading Bloc, with whom we have way less trade and potential trade than with the EU. Also, despite the government trying to claim that it's a wealthier trade bloc than the EU and so a better arrangement for us, it's complete hogwash. Not even playing with statistics, it's just a lie. On no measure, no way of measuring it can you make the CPTPP a larger market than the EU. Plus, it involves trade with countries at least one ocean away, and in most cases two, with all the extra expense and delays that entails. There is zero way of having a just-in-time supply chain with the CPTPP in the way that we could have had, but have lost with the EU. You know, and as well as trading with countries representing markets with very different tastes as well. So the capacity, even if distance wasn't an issue, to sell more is much more limited. You know, nowhere was this more evident than... Do you remember when Boris Johnson tried to sell the Australia trade deal with the British public and he held up a bag of Tim Tams? Oh, you get cheaper Tim Tams. I don't even know what a Tim Tam was. I'm still not entirely sure. I've never actually seen one. Apparently, it's like a penguin biscuit, but without the jokes. Now, I'm told you can get them in the UK, so some people must know about them. But the point is, if you put together a table of like popular Australian goods and ones of European goods, people in this country are going to gravitate towards the European table. It's more recognisable, more desirable to us. We like it. Of course it is. We're used to it. We've developed tastes for it. And it works in reverse as well. You know, why would Australia want our sort of common goods, the ones they're not familiar with? The Tories are trying to pretend that we can suddenly open the floodgates on exports to countries by agreeing slightly lower tariffs with countries who already imported the goods that we produce that they wanted anyway. Because membership of the CPTPP doesn't give you the frictionless trade that we used to have with the EU. All it is slightly lower tariffs. That's because the tariffs we have before membership on our exports to these countries are already very low because we already have trade deals with them individually. So, you know, they'll say, oh, it removes tariffs on almost all goods. Great. We already have really low tariffs on them anyway. Tariffs are not the big deal when it comes to trade with these countries. And we don't get anything else out of it. You know, but in return, we have had to accept lower standards. Just as with the Australian and New Zealand trade deals, our accession means opening up our markets to goods that the British public do not want permitted in our market. We are driving our standards down. And for what? Seriously, for what? It's not even better trade in the other direction. Sure, all things being equal, membership of the CPTPP, you would say it's better than nothing. It's slightly better than nothing for our trade. But it's worth way less to our economy than membership of the EU. And the EU did not tell us to lower our standards. In fact, the point of being in the EU is you're encouraged to raise your standards, if anything. Let us consider our post-Brexit trade deal so far. So we had the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement with the EU. That resulted in severe trade friction compared to the previous arrangement and a hit to our GDP forecast to be 4% over the medium term. Currently, it's 5.5%. The Japanese trade deal, which has actually caused our exports of goods and services to Japan to fall. I mean, that's a goof right there. Like, even a weak trade deal. I mean, the trade deals are still supposed to be better than nothing. It's like, well, it's a bit weak, but it's better than nothing. It made it go down. They're not supposed to make it worse. The New Zealand and Australia trade deals have not yet come into effect. When they do, they will undercut our own food production with lower quality, cheaper imports at a higher environmental cost as well. Remember, we can already buy the good stuff from our Antipodean friends. All the trade deal does is let them sell the crap to us as well. And that's it. Those are our trade deals so far. All the other ones you may have heard about in the Daily Express are the ones we had in the EU, they've just been photocopied and EU Tipexed out and UK inserted in its place. Exactly the same terms. Something else to consider. The Tories turned on their own trade deals. You know, think about all these deals. The deals with the EU were the handiwork of David Frost and Boris Johnson. Do they sing its praises now? No, they keep writing in the Telegraph about how awful they are. These deals are terrible, and how they were pressured into concessions by the EU. Okay, well, what about the New Zealand and Australia trade deals? George Eustace, who was a cabinet minister at the time and involved in them, said, although he didn't lead on them, said upon leaving the government that they were shite. He said, we conceded far too much for far too little. Do you see the pattern here? The government laud these deals as being the way forward when they're signed. They want all the headlines. It doesn't take them long before they start saying, actually, they're absolutely terrible. As soon as people start to appreciate the details, oh no, they were terrible deals. We were pressured into concessions. Weren't our fault. Because they aren't good deals. We are conceding too much. And why? Two reasons, really. First, we're just not very good at it. It's a long time since a purely UK negotiating team was let loose on the world to arrange trade deals. Decades, in fact. Yes, of course, we've got British trade negotiators, but they worked as part of EU teams. And the nature of trade deals has changed a lot since we had our own delegations. We've been eaten alive in trade talks by way smaller economies because our own negotiators have got little to no experience. Second, and I think the biggest factor, is that the talks have been driven far too much by political concerns. The politics should come in right at the end, really. The Tories wanted trade deals quickly, so they've been having direct oversight over all the talks all the time. You know, because they wanted the trade deals announced. That's what the public see, the announcement, the speed at which they're announced, not the details contained therein. We're conceding too much because we're not interested in the details because the public don't see that and Brexit's a con job. We're desperate to get the deal signed, and we're too desperate to get the deal signed quickly. We're not prepared to say, no, we're going to keep talking till we've got something we're happy with. We're not prepared to say, look, if we're going to keep going down a blind alley, we'll just call off the talks. I remember when the Australia deal was all but finalised. It was all agreed. We had the agreement. OK, it's fine. And then Australia thought to themselves, we think they're a little bit desperate. And they said, we want a few more concessions here. Boris Johnson basically already announced that he had his Tim Tams. And then Australia was going, well, we're not really sure. We could do with a few more concessions. To which we immediately agreed. Immediately. Because Boris Johnson had already announced that it was done and he needed that to be the case. He wanted it signed, sealed and delivered quickly. So we capitulated on everything. And so other CPTPP members have been making similar demands. I gather Malaysia and Canada in particular have been making demands that we really should be resisting, but we're not. For all the talk of the Tories maybe now being led by someone with a bit more pragmatism, because Rishi Sunak is wanting a much closer relationship with the EU, where Brexit's concerned, it's the same political miscalculations. The Tories want CPTPP membership for various reasons. The optics, not the benefits, though. There are no real benefits. Like I say, we already have trade deals with its members as a legacy of our EU membership. Free trade deals already with them. The CPTPP is actually quite a weak trade bloc. It serves a purpose for its current members who trade a fair bit with each other anyway, so there's a benefit for them. But it's of no significant benefit to us. It would be fine if we weren't conceding so much on our part. Like CPTPP membership, you can think about it as like offering a millionaire £1,000 for their Rolls Royce. It's not a good deal. Like if you were to give the millionaire the £1,000 without having to give anything in return, you go, okay, fine, I'll take it. Yeah, sure, why not? But it's not worth what we have to give in return. And it's breathtaking hypocrisy as well. Brexiteers said we should not just leave the EU, but leave the EU on the hardest possible terms so that we didn't have to follow their rules. It was all about we mustn't follow their rules. I mean, it wasn't their rules. It was our rules because we were one of the major players forming those rules. Very few rules got through without UK support. Like I keep saying, 98% of EU rules were ones that we came up with or supported as in our interests. Well, we're going to have to follow CPTPP rules if we join, and we'll have had zero say whatsoever in those. 98% of EU rules were supported by the UK. 0% of CPTPP rules were. And they don't create rules very often because they're nowhere near as integrated a trade bloc as the EU. It's a much looser arrangement. So they don't need to change rules, really. But if they do, we won't be having any serious influence. So as well as accepting the rules as they exist now, which we had no say in, if there are any new rules added, we won't have any say there. We'll have a seat at the table. No one will pay any attention to us because our priorities are not the priorities of countries at the other side of the world. They've all got very different political and trading dynamics. The absolute stupidity of leaving the EU so that we could be rule makers, not rule takers. Absolute bollocks. We used to be rule makers in the EU. Now we're not. We cannot actually make our own rules anymore. We cannot. Our producers have to follow the EU rules in order to export to the EU. So we don't decide those rules. I did a video recently about the arsenic in baby food. You know, the government can say, oh, we're changing this rule. The producers just turn around and says, well, we're going to follow the EU rules. Because you know what? We need to sell to the EU. But we can't even decide the rules for our own market. I think I had a couple of comments saying, oh, yeah, but, you know, we can at least decide the rules for our own market. So producers just producing for the UK market. You know, that's what some people are trying to argue. Okay, you know, we understand producers will have to follow the EU rules, but our government at least decides the rules for our market. No, it doesn't. We're going to follow the CPTPP rules for our market. And those rules mean having to accept goods which are bad for health and bad for the environment. And if we want to join, we have no say in those rules. We accept them all. Breathtaking hypocrisy. Absolutely breathtaking. We lose control over all rules now, affecting both our market and production, when we used to have control over all of them. And for what? We've so far taken a 5.5% GDP hit from leaving the EU. We're told that, you know, over the longer term, it'll end up being a 4% hit, where we used to decide the rules, in return for what the government reckon will be a 0.08% boost to our GDP from joining the CPTPP and having zero say in the rules that we will adopt, whether we like them or not. And unlike EU rules, where no Brexiteer has ever been able to mention an EU rule that they had an issue with, I can come up with several CPTPP rules that we do have an issue with on health grounds or environmental grounds. So bloody stupid. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.